Close your eyes. I want you to step out of the frantic, neon-lit rush of the 21st century. Leave behind the notifications, the concrete, and the noise. Travel back 3,000 years, to a world where the horizon was the edge of the known universe, and the sky was a playground for gods who were as cruel as they were beautiful. Imagine you are standing on a beach. The sand is cold. The air tastes of salt and ancient bronze. And there, standing before the vast, wine-dark sea, is a choice. A choice that defines every breath you will ever take. On one side, a long life. A life of quiet sunsets, of children's laughter, of growing old in a bed of warm wool. You will be happy. But when the last person who knew your face draws their final breath, you will vanish. You will be a shadow in a world of shadows, your name erased by the relentless tide of time. On the other side, a short life. A life of blood, iron, and agony. You will never see your hair turn gray. You will die young, far from home, with a taste of copper in your mouth. But, your name? Your name will become a monument. It will be carved into the very bones of history. 3 millennia from now, people who speak languages not yet invented will still whisper it. This was the choice of Achilles. And to understand why he chose the fire over the hearth, we have to look at the blood that ran through his veins. Achilles was not a mistake of nature, but a calculated error of the gods. It began with a prophecy, a secret so dangerous it made the king of the gods, Zeus himself, tremble on his throne. The prophecy stated that the sea nymph Thetis was destined to bear a son who would be greater than his father. For Zeus, who had murdered his own father to seize power, this was a death warrant. If he took Thetis as his lover, he would be creating the very weapon that would destroy him. So, the gods, in an act of divine cowardice, decided that Thetis must never belong to a god. They forced her into the arms of a mortal man, King Peleus. Unusual comparison. Imagine an entity made of stardust and ocean foam being forced to marry a creature of clay. That was Thetis's marriage. She loathed her husband's mortality. She saw in Peleus the stench of the grave, the inevitability of decay. And when Achilles was born, she didn't see a baby, she saw a tragedy in the making. She saw a son who was half god and half corpse. Her love was a violent, desperate thing. She wanted to edit the mortality out of his skin. The legends tell us of the river Styx, the black, freezing water that separates the living from the dead. She held the infant by his heel and plunged him into the abyss. Think of the Styx not as a river but as a cosmic barrier. By dipping him there, she was trying to armor his soul with the coldness of death itself. But that heel, the part she gripped so tightly, became the only part of him that remained human. It was the unpatched glitch in his divine software. Achilles was a fortress with one window left unlocked. But there is a darker version of this story. Some say she tried to burn away his mortality in the fire at night, anointing him with ambrosia by day. When Peleus caught her, he screamed in horror, thinking she was murdering the boy. Thetis, insulted by his human fear, abandoned them both, fleeing back to the lightless depths of the sea. Achilles was left with a father who feared him and a mother who had abandoned him. He was a boy built for a world that didn't exist yet. So, he was sent to the mountains to the centaur Chiron. Chiron did not teach him how to be a king. He taught him how to be a predator. He fed the boy the marrow of lions and the livers of wolves. He sharpened his mind like a blade and his body like an arrow. But he also gave him a lyre. This is the central paradox of Achilles. He could crush a man's skull with his bare hands, but he could also pluck the strings of a harp and sing a song so beautiful it made the stars weep. He was a monster who loved music. A killer who understood harmony. He was ready. And then the world caught fire. Across the Aegean, in the golden city of Troy, a prince named Paris had stolen a queen named Helen. It was a scandal that required a war. But it wasn't about love. It was about time, honor. The Greek kings were gathering their fleets, a forest of masts stretching across the horizon. But the prophets were clear: Troy would never fall without Achilles. And if Achilles went to Troy, he would never come back. Thetis, desperate to save her son from his own glory, hid him. She took the greatest warrior in the world and dressed him in the silks of a girl. She hid him on the island of Scyros, among the daughters of King Lycomedes. For a time, the lion of the Greeks lived as a woman named Pyrrha. Imagine a great white shark trying to hide in a pond of goldfish. It doesn't matter how much lace you wrap around it, the teeth are still there. The hunger is still there. Odysseus, the master of trickery, was sent to find him. He didn't come with soldiers. He came as a merchant. He laid out a spread of exquisite jewels, fine perfumes, and shimmering fabrics. But at the very end of the table he placed a single heavy bronze sword. While the princesses cooed over the necklaces, Odysseus signaled for a war trumpet to be sounded outside the palace gates. While the girls fled in terror, Pyrrha didn't flinch. In one motion the silk was forgotten. Achilles grabbed the sword. His eyes didn't show fear, they showed relief. The charade was over. The predator had been called home. The fleet sailed. 1,000 ships. Can you imagine the sight? The sea itself was hidden beneath the black hulls. And at the front was the Pelion, the ship of Achilles, carrying his myrmidons, soldiers who were said to have been created from ants. They were mindless, loyal, and lethal. Achilles was only 15 years old when he sailed for Troy. Think about that. We imagine him as a bearded, hulking man of 30. But in the original myths he was a teenager. He had the raw, unchecked ego of a boy who had never been beaten, and the strength of a god who didn't know how to bleed. The first 9 years of the war were a grind. Troy was a nut that refused to crack. Achilles became a ghost that haunted the Trojan countryside. He sacked 12 cities by sea and 11 by land. He was the cleaner for the Greek army. He brought back the gold, the cattle, and the women that kept the war machine running. But the war was changing him. Every life he took was a piece of his own humanity falling away. He was becoming the bronze he wore. He was the best of the Achaeans, but he was also the most isolated. He didn't care about Agamemnon's politics. He didn't care about Menelaus's stolen wife. He cared about Patroclus. If Achilles was the storm, Patroclus was the eye of that storm. They had grown up together, two boys in the mountains. Patroclus was the only one who didn't look at Achilles and see a weapon. He saw a friend. He saw the boy who played the lyre. In a world of jagged edges and sharp spears, Patroclus was the only soft place for Achilles to land. Their bond was so intense that history has struggled to name it. Were they cousins? Lovers? Brothers in arms? It doesn't matter. What matters is that Patroclus was the only thing keeping Achilles connected to the world of the living. And then, in the 10th year of the war, the king of men, Agamemnon, made the greatest mistake of his life. A plague had struck the Greek camp. Apollo's arrows were raining down death because Agamemnon had insulted a priest. To stop the plague, Agamemnon had to give up his war prize, a girl named Chryses. But Agamemnon was a man of small stature and a large ego. He demanded compensation. He demanded Briseis, the girl Achilles had claimed. This was the moment the wrath was born. Achilles didn't just get angry. He felt a cold, cosmic betrayal. He had given Agamemnon everything. He had won his battles, taken his cities, and bled for his pride. And in return, Agamemnon treated him like a servant. Achilles drew his sword. The air in the tent became heavy. He was seconds away from decapitating the king of Greece. But Athena, the goddess of wisdom, descended from the sky. She grabbed him by his golden hair and whispered, "Wait. The time for his destruction will come. But not today." Achilles sheathed his blade. But he didn't stay. He did something far more devastating. He walked away. "I swear by this scepter," he roared, "that a day will come when the Greeks will be slaughtered by the thousands. They will beg for my help and I will watch them die from the shore. And you, Agamemnon, will tear your heart out knowing you insulted the best of the Greeks." Achilles went to his tent. He sat by the sea. He waited. And for the first time in 10 years, the Trojans saw the gates of their city open. Because the lion was no longer guarding the door. While Achilles sat by his ships, nursing his wounded pride like a bitter wine, the world outside was burning. Without the lion, the Greek army was like a body without an immune system. Every Trojan spear found its mark. Hector, the prince of Troy, the man who was everything Achilles was not, a father, a husband, a patriot, was leading a tide of bronze that was pushing the Greeks back inch by bloody inch. Imagine the atmosphere in the Greek camp. The smell of fear is different from the smell of battle. It's sour. It's cold. The ships, their only way home, were being splashed with the light of Trojan torches. If the ships burned, the Greeks didn't just lose a war, they lost their lives. Agamemnon sent a delegation to Achilles. He offered him gold, horses, and even the return of Briseis. But Achilles didn't want a refund. He wanted an apology that history couldn't provide. He told them that the life of a single man was worth more than all the gold in Troy. In that moment, Achilles wasn't just a soldier. He was a philosopher of the void. He realized that once you are dead you can't spend the gold. You can't hear the praise. But Patroclus couldn't be so detached. He watched his friends being carried back on shields. He saw the healers running out of bandages. And finally he broke. He went to Achilles, his eyes red with tears, and called him pitiless. Patroclus made a desperate gamble. He asked to borrow Achilles' identity. He asked to wear the famous armor, to take the chariot and the myrmidons, and to play the part of the lion. It was a cosmic identity theft. He thought that if the Trojans believed the monster had returned, the fear alone would save the Greeks. Narrator: Achilles agreed, but with a chilling caveat. Drive them from the ships, he said. But do not chase them to the city. Do not try to steal my glory, or the gods will take your life. Patroclus didn't listen. Who could? When you put on the armor of a god you begin to think you are one. When Patroclus hit the Trojan lines, it was like a lightning strike. The Trojans fled in terror. They thought the wrath was upon them. Patroclus became a whirlwind. He killed Sarpedon, the son of Zeus. He climbed the very walls of Troy. But he was wearing a mask that didn't belong to him. The gods are the ultimate gatekeepers of reality. Apollo, the god of light and order, saw the deception. He didn't use a spear. He simply struck Patroclus on the back with the palm of his hand. It wasn't a killing blow, it was a stripping blow. The divine armor of Achilles fell away. The helmet rolled in the dust. Patroclus stood naked and disoriented in the middle of a battlefield. He was no longer a god. He was just a boy from Phthia. And that was when Hector found him. The prince of Troy drove his spear through Patroclus' stomach. As Patroclus lay dying in the dirt, Hector mocked him. But Patroclus, with his final breath, delivered a prophecy that turned Hector's victory into ash. "You won't live long, Hector," he whispered. "Death is standing right behind you. And he has my friend's face." The battle for Patroclus' body was the most brutal of the war. They fought over the corpse like wolves over a bone. But while they fought, a messenger was running toward a tent by the shore. When Achilles heard the news, he didn't just weep. He descended into a state of primordial madness. He tore at his hair. He scooped up black ash and poured it over his face, defiling the beauty that had made him the envy of the world. His cry was so loud that his mother, Thetis, heard it from the depths of the ocean. Narrator: Achilles had no armor. Hector was wearing it. He was wearing Achilles' skin, effectively taunting him from across the plain. Achilles wanted to march out naked and kill everything in his path, but Thetis stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Give me one night. I will get you armor that no mortal man has ever seen." She went to the volcano of Hephaestus, the smith god. And what followed is perhaps the most famous description in all of poetry: the shield of Achilles. Unusual comparison. Think of the shield as a hard drive of the Bronze Age. Hephaestus didn't just engrave patterns, he engraved the entire human condition. He showed the earth, the sky, and the sea. He showed two cities, one at peace with weddings and dancing, and one at war with sieges and blood. He showed farmers plowing, children singing, and the great river Oceanus encircling the world. Why put a wedding on a shield? Because that is what makes Achilles a tragedy. When he holds that shield, he is protecting himself with the image of a world he can never return to. He is carrying the weight of the long life he rejected on the very tool he uses to ensure his short glory. The next morning Achilles stepped out of his tent. He was no longer a man. He was a force of nature. When he shouted across the trench, the Trojans were so terrified that 12 of them died of heart failure on the spot. This was the return of the wrath. But it wasn't the honor-bound wrath from before. This was nihilism. Achilles didn't eat. He didn't drink. He told his soldiers that his only food would be the slaughter of Trojans. The rampage that followed was so violent that the river's commander grew angry. Achilles killed so many men that the water turned red and the bodies clogged the flow. The river god rose up in waves of blood to drown him, screaming that he was a monster. Achilles didn't care. He fought the river. He fought the water. He fought the gods. Most soldiers fight for a cause. Achilles was fighting for a funeral. He was a grieving animal with the power of a nuclear weapon. He pushed the entire Trojan army back to their gates until only one man was left outside. Hector. Hector stood at the Scaean gates. He watched the star of ill omen approaching. Achilles, shining in his divine bronze, moving with a speed that defied human biology. And for the first time in his life, Hector's courage failed him. He ran. They circled the city 3 times. The predator and the prey. The gods watched from Olympus like spectators at a stadium. Finally, through the trickery of Athena, Hector turned to face his fate. "Let us make a pact," Hector said, his voice trembling. "Let the winner return the body of the loser to his family." Achilles looked at him with eyes that had seen the end of the world. "There are no pacts between lions and men," he spat. "There are no truces between wolves and lambs." The duel was over before it began. Achilles found a gap in the armor, the very armor he used to own, and drove his spear into Hector's throat. As Hector lay dying, he begged for mercy. Achilles gave him none. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He tied Hector's feet to his chariot. He whipped his horses. And he dragged the prince of Troy through the dirt, around and around the city, while Hector's family watched from the walls. Achilles had won. He had his revenge. But as he looked at the mangled body of his enemy, he realized the most terrible thing of all. Killing Hector didn't bring Patroclus back. The void was still there. And it was getting bigger. Achilles had killed Hector, but he hadn't killed his own pain. For 12 days he lived in a loop of insanity. Every morning he tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it around the tomb of Patroclus. He wanted the earth to swallow Hector's memory. But the gods, even those who hated Achilles, could not watch this anymore. They kept Hector's skin from tearing, they kept his face from the rot. While Achilles sat in the dark, a different kind of hero was preparing for a journey. King Priam of Troy. Imagine an 80-year-old man, a king who has seen 50 of his sons die in the dust. He doesn't call for his army. He doesn't call for his guards. He calls for a wagon. He fills it with gold, with tapestries, with the last riches of a dying city. And then he walks into the Greek camp. Unusual comparison. This was the ultimate stealth mission of antiquity. Guided by Hermes, the god of thieves and travelers, Priam moved through the Greek lines like a ghost. He walked past the sentries, past the sleeping soldiers, and stepped into the tent of the man who had turned his life into a graveyard. Narrator. Achilles was eating a quiet meal when the old man appeared. In any other story, Achilles would have cut his throat before he could speak. But something happened in that tent. The air changed. Priam didn't beg for his life. He didn't scream. He simply knelt. He reached out his hands, those aged, trembling hands, and he kissed the hands of Achilles. "I have done what no man on earth has ever done," Priam whispered. "I have pressed my lips to the hands of the man who slaughtered my children. Think of your own father, Achilles. Peleus. He is old like me. He is waiting for a son who will never come home. This is the most important moment in the entire myth. It's the hard reset of Achilles' soul. For 10 years he had been a weapon. For 12 days he had been a monster. But when Priam spoke of his father, the bronze cracked. Achilles looked at Priam and didn't see an enemy. He saw a mirror. He saw the grief that was waiting for everyone he loved. And then, the greatest warrior in the world did the most courageous thing he had ever done. He wept. They wept together. The killer and the victim's father. They sat in the silence of the night, sharing bread and meat. Achilles, the man who had refused to eat until Hector was dead, finally broke his fast with Hector's father. Unusual comparison. This wasn't a peace treaty, it was a communion of the damned. They realized that the gods don't care about human suffering, that the gods are just spectators watching a tragedy for entertainment. Achilles realized that his glory was a prison. He gave the body back. He washed it himself. He granted a 12-day truce so that Troy could bury its prince with honor. For a brief moment, the war stopped. Not because of a victory, but because 2 men realized they were both exhausted by the weight of being legends. The truce ended, and the gears of fate began to grind again. Achilles knew his time was short. He had killed the Amazon queen Penthesilea. He had killed Memnon, the son of the dawn. He was clearing the board, moving toward the final square. He breached the gates of Troy. He was a god of fire, standing in the middle of the city he had spent 10 years trying to reach. But as he looked up at the temple of Apollo, he saw a figure. Paris. The man who started the war with a stolen kiss. Paris was not a warrior. He was a coward who preferred the safety of the walls to the heat of the field. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony. Curious comment. In the world of Achilles, you don't die by the hand of someone better than you. That wouldn't be a tragedy. You die by the hand of someone you despise. You die because of the one thing you overlooked. Apollo, the god who had always been the architect of Achilles' doom, guided Paris's hand. The arrow didn't fly toward the heart. It didn't fly toward the head. It flew toward the earth. It found the heel. The unpatched bug. The part of Achilles that was still human because a mother's hand had held it. Unusual comparison. It was a system crash. The arrow was poisoned, but it didn't need to be. The moment that small patch of human skin was pierced, the divine invulnerability of Achilles evaporated. He wasn't a god anymore. He was just a 20-year-old boy bleeding out in the dust of a city he would never rule. As he fell, the sound of his armor hitting the stone was like a mountain collapsing. The Greeks fought for his body with a desperation that bordered on religious fervor. They couldn't believe he was gone. How could the sun go out in the middle of the day? They burned him. They mixed his ashes with those of Patroclus in a golden urn, so that even in the lightless halls of the underworld, they would never be apart. The two halves of a single soul, finally reunited in the silence of the grave. So we return to the choice. Was it worth it? Narrator. In the Odyssey years later, the hero Odysseus travels to the land of the dead. He meets the ghost of Achilles. Odysseus tries to comfort him, saying, "Achilles, you were the greatest of us in life, and now you are a king among the dead." And Achilles, the man who chose glory over everything, looks at him with eyes that have seen the truth. He says, "Do not speak to me of the beauty of death, Odysseus. I would rather be a slave to the poorest farmer on earth, struggling to find bread, than be the king of all the dead." Curious comment. This is the final sting. The tragedy isn't that Achilles died young. The tragedy is that he realized too late that life, even a boring, quiet, anonymous life, is more precious than all the songs in the world. But we are still here. 3,000 years later. You are listening to these words. Achilles got exactly what he asked for. He is immortal. His wrath is the first word of Western literature. His face is on our screens. His name is in our dictionaries. He is the patron saint of the short and bright. He is the reminder that we all have a heel. We all have a vulnerability that will eventually bring us down. But what we do before that arrow finds us, that is what makes us human. The city of Troy is a ruin. The ships are gone. The gods are silent. But the lion still roars in the dark of our collective memory. Sleep well. And ask yourself, if the choice was yours, would you take the fire?